Good morning, everyone. My name is Paula Mitchell. I'm the operations manager here at the State Library Resource Center for the Collection Access Services Division. And I'm just starting the top of this webinar just to go over some housekeeping today. A reminder, we are in a Zoom webinar, so we won't be able to see your faces today, but chat is open, so feel free to engage us there. We're also going to have Q&A open throughout the entire presentation, so as you're listening and have some questions, feel free to shoot that over to our Q&A section, which is located at the bottom or the top of your screen. It's just a little app that you can ask some questions. We'll be live moderating the Q&A towards the end of this presentation, but we have staff who are doing projection on the back end and chat. If anything pops up that you have some questions that are immediate, meaning that you can't hear the presenter or you misheard them, please let us know and we'll let the presenter know today. We also have a live interpreter with us today, Jamie, who's supporting us with ASL interpretation throughout the session, as well as we do have closed captioning enabled. If you need that assistance, feel free to enable it on your end. It's running for us as well. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Michael Johnson, the Chief of Collection Access Services of the State Library Research Center. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Paula, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. I just wanted to do a quick good morning and welcome to the Enoch Pratt Free Library's 7th Annual Sailor E-Resources Symposium. We've got a great set of sessions lined up today, and we'll be able to get a good look at sort of all things electronic resources. This is the second time this calendar year we've actually done the symposium. If you were with us back in February, welcome back. For those who it was the first time, I just wanted to give you a special welcome. We're really excited to have you. We usually only do one symposium a year, but we're doing 2 this year because, and just to give a little background for sort of why you're seeing us in the fall, because we're in the midst of a really important contract cycle for the Sailor Database Project. For those of you who might be unfamiliar, the Enoch Pratt Free Library and its role as the State Library Resource Center provides a foundation of electronic resources for every public library and public K-12 school across the state of Maryland. We are very proud with support from state funding to provide what we think is a really strong collection of educational and other electronic resources that include the Gale databases, Heritage Quest, Family History, and Mango languages. And we've been really happy this last contract cycle to add in Maryland Legal Forms, National Geographic for Kids, and the Peterson's Tested Career Prep resources. They've been I think very successful. We've had over 1.6 million sort of specific information retrievals, as we say in the business, sort of successful uses, which is really grown over the years. So in this new contract year, and in a continued effort to be, like, we're always trying to be transparent and collaborative, we're also hosting an in-person event tomorrow for library leaders, budget managers, electronic resource librarians, as well as public service staff to really help us assess and make the best choices for the next 4 years of the contract. That's enough about tomorrow, though. I'm really happy and excited about today's virtual event, too. And we've got 3 really impressive sessions that run across a wide range of electronic resources topics. First up, we'll have our keynote address by Nick Tanzi, Assistant Director of the South Huntington Public Library and an expert on library technology, and he'll talk about the new landscape of electronic resources and how technology and customer behaviors have changed just over the years as we encounter new technologies. And next up, we'll have our digital resources team led by Tracy Thompson, manager of the department, as well as Danielle Ford, the assistant manager, and Megan Keene, the Digital Maryland project coordinator, and they'll talk about Digital Maryland and some of the resources there, as well as our Maryland State Government Documents program. And we'll wrap things up with our last session with some recent and I think really important information for everyone who works with electronic resources, which is all of us basically. Amy Dreyer, the user interface developer at the University of Minnesota Libraries, will be presenting on some of the new ADA Title II digital accessibility rules and regulations that have been recently approved just in 2024. So I think we've got a really great day set up. I don't want to take any more of your time to get things rolling, but I did want to definitely thank the fantastic work. Every time we put this together, it's anyone who's put together any kind of conference, it is complicated and a million things are going along, and the team does a fantastic job of pulling everything together and making it, I think, look really good. So I wanted to thank Tracy Thompson, definitely Danielle Ford, Tanea Knox, Megan Keene. Thanks for all your coordination with this. And of course, Paula Mitchell, the operations officer for collections and access services, who really has had so much coordination and has everything sort of set up and all these templates, and really everything keeps things flowing really, really well. So I want to thank everybody and the great team. And with that, I will turn it over for the introduction to Tracy Thompson, again, the manager of the Digital Resources Department. Tracy, just as a new introduction for her, she is new-ish to the team. It's been 6 months, but she has been knocking it out of the park, really. And she has come in during a contract year with, she lost her e-resources librarian after a couple of months to retirement, Sarah Cooperman, which I'm sure most of you remember. She was an amazing sport, and Tracy has just been taking everything perfectly and working so well with all of us here and doing a fantastic job. So Tracy, thank you, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, I couldn't have done any of this without all of you, fantastic leadership, and the team in digital resources. So I need to shout out to them as well. So I get to introduce Nick. So Michael, this is my first conference. As you just heard, I've only been here for 6 months. Michael said there was a virtual symposium coming up, and I said, well, what is that? He said, well, it has to do with electronic resources. So I did a little investigating and found my way to Nick Tanzi, who you'll be hearing from later today. And I felt like he was the perfect fit, both for me, but for the conference. Just an overview of what's new when you're navigating the digital world and electronic resources. I just noticed that he participated in a podcast for MSLA about 2 weeks ago. So if you didn't catch that already, you can look for that online if you like what you hear today. I'll tell you a little bit more specifics about Nick. As Michael said, he's the Assistant Director of the South Huntington Public Library, internationally recognized library technology consultant, and the author of many books, making the most of digital collections through training and outreach, and the co-author of Best Technologies for Public Libraries, Policies, Programs, and Services. Nick is also past column editor for Public Library Magazine's The Wired Library, and his work on the intersection of libraries and technology has been featured in Computers in Libraries, Library Journal, and Marketing Library Services. Nick blogs at thedigitallibrarian.com. I've spent quite a bit of time on there, and I recommend you all check it out as well. So let's get to Nick. Nick, are you ready?
Okay, you hear me okay? Great. Let me share my screen. So, library digital collections, landscape and future. And first off, thank you so much for the introduction. Let me not forget my manners. It's great to be here, and I hope everybody's doing well today. Today we're going to be talking about, in a somewhat roundabout way, all of the different things that are impacting our digital collections. And there's a lot of things, a lot of kind of pieces to this puzzle. We have changing technology, and that's a combination of hardware, software, advancements in things like artificial intelligence. There's changing user behaviors. As the technological landscape changes, our patrons, our students behave differently, and they have different browsing habits that change over time. There's industry trends. There's a legal landscape that impacts our ability to lend materials, how we can lend it, the affordability of it all. And so we're almost taking a multifaceted approach to trying to figure out all of those things that are going on. And then, of course, using all of that information to hopefully plan, because I always find that my preference is always to be proactive rather than reactive. I imagine as you budget, you always feel like you're running a year, maybe a year and a half behind anyways, trying to anticipate things. So the more information we have, the better understanding we have of the past, the present, and potentially the future. I think the outcome is always going to be better for us all. So what I'm saying is stick with me. We're going to be jumping around a bit, but I hopefully will I'll land the plane at the end. So we're all trying to understand a rather complex environment, right? And so my hope today is to cover how is technology changing? What are all of the recent changes that are impacting us, both as individuals, but also as organizations? I want to cover how user habits are changing, in particular with regards to media consumption. You know, some of it's the classic, is it print, is it digital? But also material types, also genre types. All of this, you know, we somewhat selfishly, right? We want to know, what does this mean for us as libraries? And hopefully I cover that. And how do we engage in planning? What can we be doing? What should we be doing? I know a big part of today is really understanding what is the best way to spend our limited resources, right? And then, of course, your questions. And as was mentioned, it's always a good time to ask a question. It just may not get answered until a little bit later. But I find that if a question pops up, it's good to drop it in the chat. If it gets answered along the way, that's awesome. If it doesn't, it's there, it's in the record, and we can get to it. And sometimes too, I promise you, I am not the smartest person in the digital room today. Your colleagues are also a great wealth of information. So I find that oftentimes the chat is that hive mind that comes up with a very good answer as well. So in the beginning, we're going all the way back. This is going to hurt a little bit, but the internet, the World Wide Web, was 1993. So 31 years ago, we really started going digital. Libraries followed just a few years after that, I would say. We all play catch up with an emerging technology. And that for me brings up some good library memories. I entered into libraries in the 90s. To be clear, I started as a baby. I entered libraries very young, the second job out of high school. And if the World Wide Web was 1993, here you see my first library gig at the Mastix Mercia Shirley Community Library. The year is 1998. And we launched a website, and you can tell we were early adopters, right? Because we got communitylibrary.org. That website is like thebomb.com of domain names at the time. It is the bee's knees. We were early in, but we know how the internet changed what we do and how it began our first forays into digital collections, into e-resources. And some of the first things were like reference databases for us, right? Over time, we began to enter into things like ebooks. And then obviously the material types have diversified over time. That was a challenging time early in my library career because it was a lot of change. The before times, before the internet, and then all of that churn and some of those statements like libraries are doomed because of the internet, when in fact it became a period of incredible growth, right? In particular in digital collections. But it was a lot of change, and that's kind of what inspired that first book I wrote, Making the Most of Digital Collections Through Training and Outreach, which was a response to how do we train staff? How do we promote all of these collections that are changing so rapidly? Now, what I don't want you to think is this is not a sales pitch. You're not part of a timeshare right now. Because this book is now 10 years old. So actually, hopefully my publisher's not listening, but I discourage you from buying a 10-year-old book on digital collections. That's not going to serve anybody well. But that was some of my first forays, right? Was the kind of the rise of our library's website, our beginning adoption of digital collections, And then a few years later, really the struggle of as those collections diversified, as it became not just reference databases, but ebooks and streaming music and streaming movies, audiobooks, magazines. We know that just the sheer volume and breadth and depth of the collection has really changed. And when I compare that past to our present, it's kind of interesting because in some ways the past was a simpler time, but it also was a period of so much churn and complexity. And what do I mean by that? Well, certainly in the beginning years of our digital collections, mid late 90s, even the early 2000s, we had less library digital content, right? We didn't have all of the things we offer today, while there's been a movement towards expanding the offerings that we have. But it was a more complex device landscape. You didn't know, and feel free to use the chat to share your experience, but especially in the early days of the ebook, you didn't know what was walking in the door. Your patrons were coming in with all sorts of different devices. It was also a period of time when Android was just as an operating system, it was on any number of devices. People that probably shouldn't have been making tablets were making tablets. You had a Walmart specific tablet. I think Jimmy Dean probably made a tablet at a certain point. It got weird. So you didn't know what was coming in the door. We know that it was a complex borrowing process. You dread the words digital rights management. Because it was new, the publishers were very uncomfortable and remained a bit uncomfortable with ebook lending by libraries. So there was a lot of friction, as they called it. That was an industry term that meant it was a horrible, prolonged, agonizing experience for the patron to just try to check out an ebook. I remember early on, I made a flyer on how to borrow an ebook on an iPad, and it was an easy 29-step process. So that was a area where there was more complexity than there is today, right? We know that the borrowing process, generally speaking, for library digital collections is easier. It was less convenient. If I wanted to borrow an ebook and I put it on my e-reader, this was pre-cloud, so it oftentimes meant having a computer, downloading software, connecting via USB port, by using a cable to my computer and then transferring stuff over. Never mind licensing the device itself. That wasn't terribly convenient. We've moved towards more convenience, more patron empowerment, patrons placing holds on digital content, patrons downloading it to their chosen device, and saving things in the cloud. In those ways, it's gotten better, it's gotten more convenient, but it's a mix. And there you see on the right, that is a PRS 500, one of the first e-readers that was out there. It was a Sony e-reader, probably weighed like 300 pounds and and probably cost like $300. And that was in 90s money, 2000s money. So it was expensive. So that was the past. Some ways simpler, some ways more complex. But what do things look like today? Well, we have a mostly settled device marketplace. Back in the day, you didn't know if it was a Windows device that was coming in. You didn't know if it was an Apple, an Android. You didn't know what e-reader was coming in. There were dozens of different types of e-readers. But here today, I'm here to tell you that, duopolies aren't usually a good thing. There's not a lot of competition. Generally, competition is good for the consumer. The fact that there's very little competition right now at least makes it easier to know what's coming into the door. Back in the year 2016, more internet traffic took place by mobile device than by desktop computer. That was the first time that ever happened, and they've never looked back. Today, 62% of all internet traffic is mobile. That's how people are accessing the internet and by extension, our digital collections. The duopoly, though, is Android and Apple, right? Android and iOS operating system. Those two account for 99.37%. BlackBerry is gone. Windows as a mobile operating system is not a thing. WebOS is not a thing. So you have pretty good certainty if somebody's walking in with a smartphone with a tablet, it's either Android, it's iOS, or I don't know where they came from, maybe the future. In terms of e-readers, it's a duopoly, but really it's Amazon. As in terms of market share, Amazon is 80% and Kobo is 10%. And then everybody else is fighting for scraps. The new thing, though, in terms of devices, and it's new-ish, is the rise of things like smart speakers. Your Amazon Echoes, your Google smart speaker. Those are new things that have a role to play in library digital collections. The present is also one of an explosion of digital content. It's databases, it's ebooks, it's e-audiobooks, digital magazines and newspapers, streaming music, streaming TV and movies. Libraries, in some cases, lend video games digitally. There are digital platforms for these, e-learning, and undoubtedly, I'm leaving things out that you do, that you offer. And the present, again, is one of ease of use. There is less friction. Downloading an ebook now, even from setup, is probably a 3 or 4-step process, not that 24, 25-step process I described back in the early 2000s. There's more device support. Certainly, there's less device types out there, but there was a time when if a patron had a Kindle Fire, you had to say, I'm sorry, you can't borrow something because we don't support that or we don't support iOS. More often than not, we're in the business of saying, yes, your device is supported. There's also more customer support. We used to be the front line for that. And while we still are, in part because of the rise of things like chatbots, there is always help available. There's more robust online help than there was in the past. But even with ease of use, we get used to things being easy, right? Ask yourself, has your patience gone up or down? Do you have a longer attention span than you did 5 years ago? How long do you have to wait for a website to load before you begin to get very angry? Maybe 3 seconds? So while there's a change there, while things have gotten better, it also raises expectations. Now people expect convenience. It's an expectation. It's not a wow for them when things work and work easily and well. Now, I want to explore some media trends that I think are impacting our digital collections, both in the present, but also from a planning standpoint in terms of what comes next. So these are some streaming video stats that I think are rather important. And this is looking at the broader market, not necessarily specifically libraries, though we will discuss that in a bit. For a very long time with the rise of streaming, it was still kind of a growing, an area of growth. People were still feeling it out. Most folks, if were not exclusively streaming, and most folks still supported traditional cable. That is rapidly changing in the last few years. At present, 99% of households pay for one or more streaming video services. So they've kind of achieved basically the entirety of the market, right? Everybody's kind of in this game now. And that is up. Back in 2022, it felt like that was the saturation point. 85% of US households paid for one or more streaming services. So when we look at that stat, when it seems like now streaming is omnipresent, it's everywhere, everyone is paying for a streaming service, it can feel like it's settled, right? That's it. There's not a lot of change. But there remains a lot of churn in the streaming video marketplace, in part because think about your own experience. You're watching TV, maybe streaming. And undoubtedly, you find out, or even you're searching the web and you see a new show that you're really interested in. And inevitably, it lands on a streaming service that you don't pay for. And you get mad. And then you have to think about, can I really support one more streaming service, or do I have to drop something? And so what we see is 45% of US households have canceled a streaming subscription in the last year because of costs. Costs were too high. Sometimes it's that the price went up. Sometimes it's that they're juggling too many services and they have to choose which one to drop. Little anecdote, when people choose what to drop, their favorite thing to drop has been Disney Plus. Which, as we think about where our niche is, where we can serve our users, that's something to consider. If they're dropping a service that's largely kid-friendly, is that an area for libraries to look at, to supplement, or when we market our collections, is that an area to target? And this will shock nobody, but we as a society hate ads in our streaming media, and 50% of people pay for the ad-free version of a service when that's an option. And as you all know, library services are ad-free. When we talk about motivating factors, what motivates a user when they're investing in a video streaming platform? 35%, the biggest motivator, was access to the shows they want. I don't think that's surprising. You pay for what you want to watch. But more interestingly, is that 34%, just a touch below, is the ability to binge watch content. People like a big back catalog of stuff to watch. And I'm sure, there's a debate. Is it a better experience when you have to wait week to week for a show? Sometimes in terms of discussion, that's a good thing. But there's nothing better than being able to have a long weekend and just plow through a couple seasons of the show you like the best. And again, think now as we go through these about the library and what we can do, because we are organizations that oftentimes have a back catalog. If you have not read the Gen Z and Millennial survey, how they use public libraries and identify through media use, I highly recommend it. You can Google that. It's through Library Journal. It is freely available. It is a great piece of scholarship that is very recent because it is difficult to find extremely recent stats, especially that are library specific. And when they're looking at Gen Z and millennials, a couple things, 92% check social media every day, 25% check multiple times per hour. Might not be a shocker, but as you think of how to market services, if you have folks that are omnipresent on social media, that's a good avenue, especially when you're marketing digital content on a digital platform. 12% of Gen Z and 8% of millennials subscribe to webcomics, and 30% of Gen Z and 38% of millennials subscribe to Audible. So webcomics are certainly an area of potential growth, especially when you look at this age. Audible is an interesting one because it's great that they're interested in audiobooks. We know, though, as a library that oftentimes there's Audible exclusives that are not sold to libraries. So while there's interest in that material type, there may be titles that we simply cannot get due to licensing restrictions. "52% of Gen Z and millennial physical library patrons say they borrow from library digital collections. So there's not a full conversion because this is specifically Gen Z millennials that are using the physical library. About half of them also borrow library digital content. We sometimes engage in these weird assumptions. There's a lot of ageism when it comes to technology, that we think the younger generation is somehow completely wired all the time and shuns print media, but that's simply not true. But here is a matter of when we talk about expectation and convenience. 75% of Gen Z and millennial physical library patrons believe that a library wait of 1 week or less is long. So imagine, we know that in particular, when we look at our digital hold lists, they can get pretty long. We try to keep them short, but what we think is a short and reasonable hold list, and what Gen Z and millennials think, a couple days is a long wait. Not for me. I'm pretty excited if I can get an ebook I put on hold in a week. And overwhelmingly, they prefer print. Ebooks overall is a complicated picture. Part of what complicates it is the fact that we went through a pandemic, continue to go through a pandemic, that really shook things up. It shook the print marketplace. It definitely shook up the digital, library collections. E-reader sales overwhelmingly are in decline. Pew Research looked at this. In 2014, 32% of adult Americans owned an e-reader. By 2020, that had dropped to 19%. Part of the reason is a rise in tablet ownership. A tablet became the all-in-one device. It was my web browser, right? It's my e-reader. It's the thing I watch movies on. It's the Swiss Army knife. So it coincided with the rise of tablet ownership. But I talk about how things are complex, and it's partly why we jump around. So the tablet went up and began to replace the e-reader. Ebook sales in the last few years, though, have been static. And part of that is eye fatigue. And if you've read on a tablet, it is not the most gentle device on your eyes. And we are in a period of rising screen time. It's the smartphone, it's the tablet. It's also that we're all in a kind of a Zoom-driven society, right? Many of you during the pandemic probably spent more time on video calls than you ever did in your life, both personally and professionally. And that has really led to a print resurgence because it's not, we read books, right, as escapism, and it doesn't feel like an escape when you go from a Zoom call to then picking up that same tablet and then trying to read on it. So that's where all of these factors can really, it gets interesting. I will also say that audiobooks, which have seen rapid growth, had a slight period of stagnation, which coincided with the pandemic. And part of that was, and I can speak to this personally, I listen to audiobooks when I'm commuting, when I'm in my car driving somewhere. And for a period of time when there was a lot less commuting, when there was a lot more work from home, that coincided with a stagnation in those collections, which have since, you can see a resurgence if you check your own stats, I'm sure. So just to reiterate my thesis that things are complicated. We cannot talk about digital collections without talking about book talk. We know that TikTok has a tremendous influence on the publishing industry, and that's print and it's digital. But in particular, we have a print association with it. The Publishers Association did a survey, and they were finding that 59% of 16 to 25-year-olds have said that book talk or book influencers, and I love that term, I want to be a book influencer, have helped someone discover a passion for reading. We know that internet personalities are big, and they are reading, and so by extension, their followers are being kind of regaining an interest in reading. Adult fiction books saw an increase of 8.5% in sales in 2022, which has largely been attributed to TikTok. From a genre standpoint, we are being told that 2024 is the year of romantasy. That's romance and fantasy. But here's one of the issues with book talk that kind of cuts both ways. It has led to a resurgence of reading. It has popularized books that are kind of older books. People see somebody reading a book that's been out for any number of years, and it rekindles interest. We can handle that quite well in print, but we know that back catalogs are expensive for us to maintain when it comes to ebooks. We have to continue to pay oftentimes to retain that content. Or if that content has been checked out a certain number of times, it may expire and we have to relicense it. So that can be a stress on what should otherwise be a strength for libraries. It's a strength in print. It's potentially a liability or a source of financial strain in digital. Those were some industry trends, but I also want to bring it closer to libraries. 2022, there was the Public Libraries Materials Survey. That was from Library Journal. And this was an interesting year because this is very much looking at the pandemic, right? In part, what is the effect there? And it was really themed as settling into the new normal. Some of the key takeaways here. There is tremendous growth in library streaming media platforms, music, movies in particular. 23.5% growth year to year. That's from 2020 to 2021. To be clear, though, it's a big percentage growth, but for most libraries, that's a small overall expenditure. But it's an area where we need to invest more. Unsurprisingly, we also put quite a bit of money into ebooks and downloadable audiobooks, 15% and 11.8% respectively. But we know that the money has to come from somewhere, right? So where did it come from? Well, if those were the growth areas, the money came from paring back physical audiovisual media. The biggest was physical audiobooks and music CDs, 12.2% and 14%. To the point where 11% of libraries that were surveyed, public libraries, indicated they completely stopped purchasing audiobook CDs, and 9% stopped buying music CDs. If you buy a car, you don't have a new car, right? There's no CD player anymore. And so that is a trend that is going to continue. There's no going back. I don't think we're going to see like the vinyl resurgence when it comes to CDs. I was very lucky. I almost was one of the last people on earth to buy a 5 CD changer for my car some years ago. But I luckily, I felt my hairs, kind of rising on the back of my neck, and I knew I was about to make a terrible mistake. And then the Bluetooth player came out like a year later. And then without a doubt, physical books remain the key expenditure with regards to materials for libraries. 49%, almost half of the money we spend on materials is still on print books. So you can see where the areas of growth are: streaming media, ebooks, and audiobooks. And audiobooks really has seen quite a bit of growth even more recently. And we see the areas of contraction, anything on CD, but in particular music, in particular physical audiobooks. And DVDs are declining for us. And it's a matter of availability, I imagine, for many of you. What comes out on Blu-ray anymore? It's a much smaller sliver of materials. Now, we know that in the last few years, AI has very much been.
I thought you might want to answer a question about the topic you were just speaking on instead of moving on to AI. So
Sure.
does that sound good?
Yeah, what do we got?
In the chat, there's a question. Do you know of libraries that let patrons check out e-readers, or are they too controlled by Amazon?
So there are libraries that certainly lend out e-readers. There's actually that was more common a number of years ago. That has gotten more as the e-reader became more available and the price has gone down. That model of lending is less commonplace, but separately, and I cannot name the vendor, but there are library vendors that are working on a more managed version of lendable e-readers where you can have a little more control over the content that goes on them. It's more purpose-built for lending tablets. So that's certainly something to explore versus pre-downloading content. Pre-downloading content tends to be easier and less expensive when you're doing things like Gutenberg and public domain stuff. But yeah, certainly this was more commonplace a few years ago to kind of when people were still unsold on the idea of e-reading, and it was a try before you buy. That was something we did back at Mastix Mauritius, and I'm sure many libraries have done this, where we would purchase books, we would license them to a number of e-readers, and then we would lend them out that way.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. I actually would add to that because I was taking notes as you were speaking. What about like a Roku or something like that that's already logged into an account
Yeah,
to
so
loan those out? What are your thoughts on that?
that's one where, and I should have like made this statement at the start, like I am not a medical professional and I'm also not a legal professional. Um, the Roku lending, and I have libraries that do this within my own county. I have always been kind of like, I don't know that this is technically legal. I don't know that like, you know, some of these big media companies are going to punch down at a library, but it feels like something that probably, if we look at the terms of service, is questionable. But that's me as not a lawyer.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, I'll let you move on to AI.
Sure. So anytime we talk about technology, I imagine that, oh, you know what, Jamie, you and me both are going to take a drink right now. So AI is one of those elephants in the room, right? When we talk about technological change, disruption, um, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about AI because it is impacting our collections, digital and print. We are seeing a rise of AI authored books. This is becoming increasingly commonplace and can be a source of frustration when we know that from a collection development standpoint, sometimes you're purchasing, right, you're specifically purchasing content, uh, by title, and sometimes you're buying access to something more akin to a database, right, to a pool collection where you're not making individual title choices. And there's always been a quality control issue there. We've seen some years ago, Hoopla had some content that they like that does not match our collection development policies that found its way into that. Um, so now we're seeing the rise of AI authored books, so much so that Amazon now has a rule that you can only publish 3 books per day. That is clearly targeted at 2 entities. That's targeted at artificial intelligence, and it's targeted probably at James Patterson. So he may need to slow down. Then there's AI narrated audiobooks, which is something that, again, AI we often have mixed feelings about. Audiobooks are an incredibly accessible option. So the rise of inexpensive audiobooks can be a great thing for access, but obviously it's quite concerning to people who make their livelihood narrating books. I'll point your attention to something that's maybe less morally dubious, which would be the Project Gutenberg Open Audiobook Collection, public domain books, where there's now high quality AI generated audiobooks. So that can fill a need, and one where it does it in a way that's financially sustainable for us and in a way that doesn't imperil, at least is more respectful of licensing. And you will see a rise of AI collection development platforms, platforms that can analyze your collection, that can functionally read your collections, and then tell you where they may be deficient. They can be capable of things like diversity audits, but the same tools of inclusion can be used for exclusion, and we need to be concerned about that. If you can find content or find the absence of content, you can repair that deficit, right? You can add to your collection Or you can use this technology to identify what you find objectionable and try to remove it. And we know that we're in an era of book banning, of censorship. AI integrations have existed for some time within our digital collections. Think about our libraries. We have our digital branches, and they are an amalgam of third-party services, right? There's ebook collections, there's databases, there's calendar software, there's language learning software. There's all of these things that we present as the library, but there are lots of vendors. Customer support has been an AI-powered customer support, has been a part of many of these collections, many of these vendors for a long time. Overdrive supplies ebooks to 95% of our libraries in North America. Back in 2019, they indicated that 1/3 of their customer service was handled by artificial intelligence. When your patrons are getting help, how do I borrow an ebook? How do I set up the app? That is oftentimes AI powered. That is the 24/7 help that is available. So we need to be cognizant with that because I know that chatbots are an area of concern because it can feel like replacement, but it's an area where AI has been quite active within the library experience. And then we have the rise of smart speakers, voice assistants, um, your Echo, your Amazon Alexa, your Google Home. And there have been attempts at integrating library collections into smart speakers. The early ones seem to have been unsuccessful, but it is possible to be too early to the party. I've had libraries within Suffolk County that started adding ebook collections, quite robust ones, in the late 90s, early 2000s. They weren't wrong. Ebooks became popular, but they were early. And it predated like the smartphone or the e-reader. And so most folks weren't actively seeking out ebooks to download onto their computers, their desktop computers, right? That's not a great experience. So Hoopla back in 2018 kind of tried and then shelved content integration. They had what was called with the Amazon Smart Speaker, it can download skills, much like an app. And one of the skills was the Hoopla skill. So it could just fetch digital content, audiobooks, music, and play it over your smart speaker. That didn't go so well. Overdrive has experimented on and off with integrating Google's virtual assistant into their collection. Show an example of that. But I think in both cases, it's been that they're just a bit too early to the party. That's not the same as being wrong.
Hey Google, talk to Libby.
Hi there, you can get a book recommendation or look for a book. What'll it be today?
Look for a book.
What book would you like to find?
Sophia of Silicon Valley.
Let's take a look. Do you mean Sophia of Silicon Valley by Anna Yen?
Yep.
You can borrow the ebook or audiobook or read its description. What would you like to do?
Borrow it, please.
The ebook and audiobook are both available.
I think we can see how that story ends. So that is an example of a rather unsophisticated AI assistant, right? What we see now with the development of ChatGPT 4.0 that's being built into things like a smartphone, like a iPhone, or Gemini that is being built into Android phones, then you can see where the utility is there. And I suspect you will see better and more common integrations of library collections into voice powered assistants. Databases were one of our early forays. AI is kind of messing up the quality of a lot of academic journals, for example, and it's an area of, I would say, concern, because with an absence of rules and regulations, where quality control may be lacking, bad information finds its way in. There's been a number of instances where scientific articles are published in journals. Clearly, peer review failed because they don't even pass the kind of the sniff test. You look at it and it's just bad. Um, so it is an area of concern, especially as academic journals, as databases look to turn into things more akin to a large language model in terms of a chatbot, something you talk to. If it's drawing information on bad data, on bad articles, that's an area of concern. I'd like to tell you I have an immediate solution here. I do not, other than be wary. Now, just because something's published in an academic journal, if the oversight is lacking, bad stuff can find its way in. I never thought I'd have to blur out an image of a rat, but apparently it was quite explicit. AI generated genitalia. Don't want to ruin anybody's day today. Along those lines, though, we are beginning to see the change in databases where they are adopting artificial intelligence to make search more conversational, less Boolean, less, and or operators, um, less analytical, more like you're talking to a person. Going to hit play. There's going to be a little bit of kind of cheesy elevator music. Actually, I can probably mute that. I can mute that. But you see where, this is Scopus AI, and this isn't to say this is good or bad, but this is a database that is adding that type of chat GPT type functionality to their search, where you ask it a question, it answers, more like a paragraph with inline citations to actual journals. Something to look at. It's a development. It'll be the type of thing that as you assess reference databases, it will be part of a feature set that you will have to look at and see, is this good, is this bad? As is often the case with AI, is this ethical? And make that determination. Let's talk challenges and opportunities. As I mentioned, the digital is another battlefield for censorship. Book banners have not gone away. They've simply logged on to the internet. And we're seeing nationwide challenges to individual titles, but also entire platforms. Florida, in many ways, is one of the epicenters of kind of censorship. We've seen school districts in Brevard County that have blocked access to the Epic app. That's a collection of ebooks, in part because the laws that are being drawn up are finding that that content crosses a line, and so they are blocking access to it. We're seeing the same thing with Overdrive in Austin, Texas. There are certain topics that they're determining are taboo, oftentimes LGBTQ, oftentimes, perspectives of people of color. Folks are having trouble reckoning with the history of slavery. And so that content is being deemed age inappropriate, and they're blocking access not just to individual titles, but sometimes the structure of the platform cannot exclude individual titles or cannot promise that there won't be access to individual titles, so they're wholesale being blocked. AI is now powering book bans in Mason City School District in Iowa. They're using ChatGPT to determine what books, violate their policies and are blocking them. They're taking humans out of it and using computers to intervene instead. That's happening in print. It will happen in digital. But we know that generally speaking, censorship fails in the end. You tell somebody not to read something, that's the best way to get somebody to read something. Brooklyn Public Library has now been joined by a number of libraries in Seattle, along with other places, in Books Unbanned. That's free digital cards for ages 13 to 21-year-olds as a way to skirt book bans, to offer digital access to titles that are commonly banned. So it's the new battlefield. It's the folks that are pushing for academic and intellectual freedom. It's the folks that are trying to block access to thoughts and ideas that they find objectionable. Sadly, though, we're also in a period of unsustainable costs and adverse legal decisions. Maryland took a stab at trying to have an ebook law to improve access and lending terms for libraries. They went up against the Association of American Publishers. The Maryland bill back in 2021 was pushing for reasonable terms. If you sell to an individual, you have to sell to libraries under reasonable terms. This is ebooks specifically. Sadly, that bill was found unconstitutional. New York had tried a similar bill, but actually had eyes on Maryland. And I think even before the Maryland decision came in, our own governor vetoed the bill. New Hampshire is trying right now. They have a bill that is in progress, where the library would be able to dictate the loan periods. They would be able to purchase ebooks at prices closer to consumer rates and would eliminate per cert costs. That's one to keep an eye on. They're going the route of the same way they handle the bid process within the state. If you want to sell to the state, you have to have certain safety, like if you're doing construction. They're saying if you want to sell in the state, you have to adhere to these terms. Now, I wish it was a bigger state than New Hampshire. I would love to see like a New York or a Texas. I have a little bit of fear that a smaller state is easier to ignore as a market, but we'll see. More recently, the Internet Archive also took on the American Association of Publishers on controlled digital lending, where they would scan a book and then offer access, one copy, one user. That was found to be a copyright violation. They appealed, and I believe just last week had lost their appeal. And then, as a matter of access, I have a lot of concerns about movies simply because, listen, people canceling Disney Plus, right? In terms of that's the one they most commonly will drop due to cost. The library has a hard time stepping in because we can't get that content digitally. There are giant kind of gaps in what we're able to license at the library, in particular with movie content. So that's concerning for me long term. There's also progress being made. The Palace Marketplace is a place where libraries can purchase ebooks with more favorable lending terms for libraries. There was recently a major agreement between the Digital Public Library of America and the Independent Publishers Group. So this is where you can not just purchase, but you can actually own your digital copies of ebooks and audiobooks. So Palace Marketplace is a place to kind of check out where it's more favorable lending terms. Is the selection perfect? No, but it is improving, especially with some of these recent license agreements that have taken place. Another area of strength for libraries is local content curation and creation. Really neat thing, I think, is Musicat and Rabble. That is an open sourced librarian developed platform for streaming music, where you can stream and or download music. Libraries are using this software and this platform to build local collections of music and then be able to lend it out to their patrons to get it out in the community, which is really neat. A lot of communities have distinct music scenes. There's self-publishing of ebooks. BiblioBoard is one where you can both, help people to publish their own ebooks, but also as a lending model, as a place to house the collection. And I think sometimes when we can't go big, the trick is to go small, is to go local, is to be community responsive. This is an example of a MusicCat site. This is the Multnomah County Library. And they're building their own collections of local artists, which then can be streamed, in some cases can be downloaded. It is a potential area of growth. When we talk about the lack of access for things like streaming movies, this can be something where you elevate your own community's creations. We saw the frustration that people have with streaming media. We love it. We hate paying for it. We hate ads. The cost is unsustainable for many users. It's also a very confusing marketplace. And I'm often asked, what is the most popular technology program we do at my library? And the answer is easy. It is, we offer a class on cutting the cord, on navigating streaming movie services. We have to offer it multiple times a month because people are always trying to figure out how to navigate that marketplace, how to get the best value, how to find their shows, what are their options for getting stuff. And when we engage people in those classes, we of course also sell our library digital content. And in doing so, play to our strengths. Our services, things like Canopy, for example, or Smart TV compatible, the Snap. When I look at things like Hoopla, we have a back catalog. We have multiple seasons of a show. So it has that binge worthiness that we know was one of the things that people seek out in a streaming service. We're free, and I put free in quotations because, of course, we're tax supported. But the fact that somebody can get stuff at no additional cost at a time when half of Americans are typically picking what service they're about to drop as part of that juggling act, that's advantageous for us. And then, of course, most of our services, I would think, are ad-free, which is a source of frustration for patrons. So if they can get something without ads that doesn't cost anything extra, that has a back catalog, I would also prioritize any service you have that has kid-friendly content at a time when people are dropping Disney Plus. Those are strengths, those are potential opportunities. I think we do really well when we make the financial argument. Don't you hate paying for all these streaming services? Wouldn't it be great to get one that you don't have to pay for? So I want to share some final thoughts. The first one is, I am imploring you, do not dismiss print. I feel like every few years we do talk about the death of print. What we find is there's a combination of folks who are having eye fatigue, right? Just screen fatigue. We're finding folks that are creatures. I describe myself as a kind of like a, person who takes advantage of opportunity. If I'm a creature of convenience, if I can get it in print, I will get it in print. If I can get it in digital, I will get it in digital. We see that folks do not like to wait. In particular, our millennials and Gen X do not like to wait for content. They have a different definition of what is a long time to wait. And so print, if they can get it immediately, is an attractive option. So do not dismiss it. We saw when we look at our peers in the industry, 49% of our collection expenditure is still in print. I don't read much print, but you cannot dismiss it. You need to know your user. And I think that's something that just is kind of evergreen, and it's not specific necessarily to digital content as libraries. We are community responsive. We know our users. We meet them where they are. I've worked at libraries where, it's more working class. When everybody else had DVDs, we were still VHS. When people went to Blu-ray, we were still DVD. You cannot accelerate change in that way. You meet your user where they are. So you see what their borrowing habits are. What are their preferred formats? What are the content types that they like? What are the genres? Because oftentimes the digital collections you look at have different genre strengths. So know your user. We wear many hats in libraries, and oftentimes we're not trained for all of these roles we end up occupying. We're not necessarily natural marketers. We tend to think that free is enough. So we're not really salespeople, but you need to be a salesperson, but a good one, not like a kind of shady used car salesman. You need to be somebody that knows the product, knows your patron, and is helping them solve a problem. So play to your collection strength. Know if it has a great back catalog of educational materials, if it's very kid-friendly, if there's Spanish language content. Those types of things can allow you to make really good persuasive arguments and really hand sell content much more effectively. And that goes back to being hyper-local, hyper-responsive. Knowing your community, knowing what they're interested in, finding out and making those pivots when their interests change. We're seeing some user behaviors change. We saw the potential for music, for example, to curate local collections of music. If the national scene is unavailable to us, when we look at, movies, for example, how great is it to be able to curate and go hyper local with your music scene? So I will be sharing these slides out so you'll get the works cited. I know that this is the most exciting slide I have today, is all the numbers and figures, but that's some of the scholarship that I've drawn upon today. And this is my contact information, but at this time, I think we're good for questions and answers.
Yes, thank you so much, Nick. I have 2 pages of notes, things I hadn't heard of. That was excellent. I hope everyone got some good tips and information. We do have a couple questions. Someone asked in the chat, are you able to, oh, I see a little heart coming up the screen. That's cute. Are you able to share the curriculum of the Cutting the Cord class? That sounds like something a lot of libraries would like to offer. Is there any way you
Yeah,
could?
so what I'll do, Tracy, is I believe I gave you a PDF of my slides. I'll shoot you an email just with kind of the curriculum that we use for the Cutting the Cord class.
That would be great. And we can maybe link it into the slides when we post them on the Slurk website. So
Yeah, sounds good.
people can look for them there. Another question is, wonder if anyone has experimented with linking to the print catalog natively in Libby when no electronic copies are available. Have you heard of anyone doing that?
I have not. I think it's always important, though, discovery is such an important part of this all, and it's something we've often struggled with, right? It's, usually I've seen it as the reverse, is trying to get the digital into our OPAC. So I wouldn't be familiar, although I would also lean on the group chat, see if anybody.
Yeah, I don't see anything about that, but it is interesting because we all know nobody likes the hold times. All right, I don't see any other questions. We can give it a minute. We had lots of chat while you were going. I don't know if you saw, people were happy you talked about the Internet Archive decision.
Yeah, it's, most of the recent legal decisions have not been great. Even there was a Senate committee, Commerce Committee, that was looking at ebook prices and library lending and seemed to have at least internalized many of our arguments. I was excited about that. And that seems to have just kind of died in committee. So I don't expect any legislative relief there. Generally speaking, when I try to predict what the publishing industry is going to do or what any company is going to do, they're going to do whatever makes the most financial sense for them. Folks can give lip service to libraries, but they're companies that are seeking to make money. So that's why I tend to not necessarily fight the tide with some of this. I tend to try to pick our spots. If publishers, if streaming services are not going to budge in terms of library access, where are our areas of opportunity that we can focus our attention on? And maybe legislative relief comes, but it doesn't seem like anything's coming anytime soon.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to let everyone go early. I hope that many of you that are here are able to join us at 1 o'clock. We've got lots of thank yous, Nick, for a thorough presentation. At 1 o'clock, my department, Digital Maryland, there'll be 3 of us presenting on empowering public knowledge and preserving heritage. Again, the theme for the day is kind of access and equity. And Nick, you nailed it. So I feel like we had lots of great ideas generated from all of that information. So you can enjoy all the thank yous coming in. Can you see them in the chat?
I can. I owe everyone an apology for, I forgot with the Hey Google thing. There is always like that 10% chance it activates somebody's phone. I once activated about 40 phones when I was talking about artificial intelligence, and I think that scared everyone momentarily. And then also just thank you, Jamie, for the translation service. Technology is a hard topic to translate. So that's appreciated.
Yes, thank you. I
There's a
thought
lot of jargon.
Jamie's been working hard. Thank you, Jamie, from me as well. All right, everyone. Well, go take a walk, have some lunch. Nick, we'll talk to you again soon, I hope.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, thanks very much. Bye, everyone.
All right, everyone.